All right, number one, function. We have g of x equals ax squared plus 24. For the function g above, a is a constant, so that basically just means it's some number. And g of 4 equals 8. What is the value of negative 4? So remember, when you're doing these functions, this 4 is kind of the input, and the 8 is the output. So we have g of x equals ax squared plus 24, and they tell us that equals 8. So when they tell us that g of 4, that means that wherever you see an x, you put parentheses in there, and you replace it with the 4. All right, so we end up with an equation that we can solve. Now we got to be careful. We got to use order of operations. So 4 squared would be 16a plus 24 equals 8. Subtract 24 from both sides, and we get negative 16. Divide, and we get a equals negative 1. Now be really careful there, because they want you to pick C. However, it's not the right answer, because we need to finish the problem. We need to now go back and substitute and change our input to negative 4. So I'm going to go back to the original equation, but I'm going to do an input of negative 4. And now this negative 1 is going to come into play, because I can substitute it up above, so I have negative 1 instead of a. X is now negative 4 squared plus 24. And then what we can do is we do our parentheses. Negative 4 times itself is positive 16. Multiply that by negative 1 added to 24, and that would be negative 16 plus 24, which comes out to be 8. So the correct answer is A. Now, kind of looking back at the problem, we could have realized and used this first answer, because if you're going to input 4 in for x, since we're squaring it, 4 squared for x is going to be the exact same thing as negative 4 squared. They both come out to be 16. So really, we knew the answer was going to be 8 right away. So, all of this work was kind of unnecessary, I guess. All right, number 2. Looks like we have a chart, shipping charges. We have the weight of something plus how much it's charged. Says the table above shows the shipping charges for an online retailer. First key thing I see here is the word linear. There's a linear relationship, so that means it should be changing by the same amount. Which function can be used to determine? So basically they want us to figure out which one of these equations fits the chart. And I have a strategy I do for all of these. So the input is our x. The output over here is y, which remember, y is also, can be the same thing as f of x. So y equals f of x. It looks kind of sloppy there, but bear with me. So when we're doing the chart, I can kind of come down and I can figure out all my changes in my y values. So these are my y values. If you look at it, y is changing. So the first one, it looks like it jumps $4.95. And a lot of times I like to write this as change in y, or delta y. Now for the x jump in the same spot, the x jumped by 5. So remember that the slope of a line, slope, is just the change in y divided by the change in x. So our change in y over there was 4.95, and our change in x is 5. And if you divide those two out, it ends up coming out to be 0.99 or 99 cents. So that right there helps me eliminate C and D. Now the only other thing I need is I need to check out the y-intercept, because looking at this has a y-intercept. This one has a y-intercept of 0. So one thing I could do is the y-intercept is always when x equals 0. So it's kind of a fact you should know. You have a y-intercept when x equals 0. So going backwards on my chart, if I went backwards another 4.95, that would put me at 11.99. So that point right there tells me that the correct answer here is B. Now you could also just start plugging some of these in. So for some people that don't really want to get into that fancy algebra kind of stuff, you could have just started trying equations. You know, you could have tried the first one and did y equals 0.99x and basically just stick in the 5 and go 0.99 times 5, and you'd have got 495, which it's supposed to come out to be 1694. So that would have told you this one doesn't work. And then you could have just keep on going down the line, but there's other problems where you can't substitute in like that. So I like to kind of teach you the general way. All right, number 3, for the function f defined above, what is the value of f of -1? So this is just a good old school plug and chug. So f of -1 is basically, you stick -1 anywhere where you see an x. You know, I should put it in parentheses, but there's really not a lot going on there, so it's not terribly important, but it's good practice. -1 plus 3 is 2, divided by 2 equals 1. So basically what that means is when you put -1 in, you get positive 1 out. So the correct answer there is C. Number 4, h of x equals 2 to the x power. So this is a exponential equation. The function x is defined above. What is h of 5? So h of 5 subtract h of 3. Well, h of 5 basically means you plug 5 in. So that's 2 to the 5th power. Take away, h of 3 is when you plug 3 in for x. So 2 to the 3rd. Now we just got to work this out. 2 to the 5th is 32. Remember, it's just 2 times itself 5 times. Take away 2 to the 3rd, which is 8. Subtract those two. Final answer of 24. So the correct answer there is C. Be careful. One error that I see kids make is when they're calculating this part, they accidentally multiply and do 2 times 5 is 10 and 2 times 3 is 6, and they get an answer of 4, which would be right there, but don't do that. That's what they want you to do. Number 5, a little bit of trickery here. There's no real equation, but you have kind of a bunch of f of statements. So it says f of 2 is 3, f of 3 is 5, g of 3 is 2, g of 5 is 6. What is f of g of 3? So some of you may have learned this in advanced algebra, but f of g of 3 could also be written as f small circle g of 3. Either way, this is called a composition, and the big thing you want to know about compositions is you want to go with the inside out. So start inside. So when you're trying to figure out what is f of g of 3, first thing we want to do is focus on g of 3. Well, they tell me what g of 3 is. G of 3 is equal to 2. So I'm going to substitute a 2 in place there. And now we need to figure out, well, what is f of 2? Well, f of 2, they tell me right up here, they tell me that f of 2 equals 3. So the correct answer here is B. Alright, so I have a table here. It says the table above shows some values of a linear function. So we know this thing is a straight line. Which of the following defines f? So which one of these equations will the numbers fit? Remember, you can think of this as x, and then f of n is kind of like your y. So you have inputs and outputs. One way would be just plug the numbers in until you get one that works for all of them. Something I want to show, though, because I think it's important, is that an easy way to find slope is change in y over change in x. So when I'm looking at this chart, my y is changing and it's increasing by 3 every single time. We're going up by 3. Positive. And every time my x, or my n in this case, is going up by 1 every time. So it looks like the slope of this line has to be 3. So I'm looking at my equations down here. They're all written in y equals mx plus b form. And remember, in mx plus b form, whatever number's in front of the x is your slope. So I'm looking for a 3. So the correct answer here is C. Some people like to just plug numbers in and find the one that works. The problem is for some of these problems, they work for multiple equations. So for instance, when you're looking at, let's say this first one, this one works for a few of these guys. When you stick 4 in, you do get 7. Actually, no, you don't. That one doesn't work. When you stick 1 in, do you get -2? You do. So 1 take away 3 equals -2. So this pair worked in the first one, but it's not going to work in all of them. If you plug it in to all of them, it's probably not going to work in every single one. Or that one might work, but maybe this one won't work. So there's too many combinations to try. I really like to go with the slope route. Number 7, f of x equals 3/2 x plus b. And the function above, b is a constant, so it's just some number. And then they tell me f of 6 equals 7. So this is a first major clue. This tells me that when I put 6 in, I get 7 out. And if you've done enough of these, when you have some constant that you don't know, you're going to need to use this clue to figure out what that b is. And then eventually we'll come back in step 2 and we'll plug in the -2 to get the final answer. So let's kind of work through this. This is a common question of theirs. So let's do this. F of 6 equals 7. So f of 6, which is really 7, happens when you go 3/2. You plug the 6 in here plus b. So let's kind of work this thing out. 7 equals, that would be 18/2 plus b, or 7 equals 9 plus b minus 9 minus 9. You get b equals -2. So they want you to pick this answer, but don't do it because we're only halfway there. So now that we know that b is -2, I'm going to come back and do part 2 of the equation, which is plugging that -2 in. So to find f of -2, it's 3/2, put my input in there, and then plus, and instead of b, we know that b is -2 because we solved that right here up above. So let's work this out. -3/2 times -2, put a 1 under it if I want. That's -6 divided by 2, which is -3, added to a -2, gives me a correct answer of -5a. Number 8, if f of x equals -2x plus 5, what is f of -3x equal to? So on this one, they give me an input of x, and then they want me to know how that's going to change when I put in -3x. So I'm going to kind of do it like this. If f of x equals -2x plus 5, well, then f of -3x is going to equal -2. And wherever I see this x up here, I'm just going to change the input, make sure I put parentheses around it. And then I just figure out what that is. So that comes out to be +6x plus 5. And that one is going to be, correct answer, B. All right, number 9, we've seen a couple like this before. They give us a table. They give me some x values, some y values, but they write it in f of x notation. And it's a linear function, which makes it nice because it's changing by a constant amount, which defines f. So again, you could always plug those numbers in, and you need to find out which one of these equations here all 3 of these can fit into. So you'd have to try all of these guys to see which one equation all of those work for. But I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to use slope-intercept form to figure this out. So looking at the chart, it looks like every time the y goes up by 8, the x goes up by 2. So my slope is change in y over change in x, which is 8/2, aka 4. So right there I could finish the question. Coming down here, C is the only answer that's got 4 in the place of the slope. And remember, y equals mx plus b. So there's where your slope is, so that's what you're looking for. If you wanted to get the b part, like let's just say that the question wanted to know the y-intercept piece, You could work backwards. If you kind of fill in the pattern on this table, if x jumps up to 2, the y is going to jump up halfway, so instead of going up by 8, it'll go up by 4, which will put me at 9. And then you could go backwards to get 0, and if you go backwards 4, you'll get 1. So 0, 1 is on the graph, and that 1 is what gives me my y-intercept. So just another thing that might help you out on other problems. All right, number 10, kind of a strange problem here. It says the table above shows some values for w and t, for which value of x is wx plus t of x equals x. So looking at the columns, if I do wx plus t of x, they're wanting to know which one is going to equal that number. So in this first row, wx plus t of x, well, that equals -4. So that one didn't work. So now we go to the next row. 3 plus a -1 equals 2. That one I believe works. I think that's going to be our answer. So let's just check a couple more out just to make sure. So the next one, 4 plus 1 should equal 5. Doesn't. 3 plus 3 should equal 6, not 4. This bottom one should add up to be 4, not 5. So yeah, the correct answer is there in yellow. So for which value of x? So right there it is. Correct answer, B. Number 11. So after you've done quite a few of these, you can kind of see they love these tables, and either finding out what equation can make the table work or more information about the table. But it says, what is the value of f of 3? So they're wanting us to figure out what's f of 3. Well, so far, they've given us f of 0, f of 2, f of 6. So 3 is going to be somewhere in the middle there. So let's just kind of check this out. There's two ways you could probably do this question. I'm going to try to find the equation of the line because I think it's the most powerful. So if I look at the x's and the y's, and I always this is my strategy on a lot of these, I'm going to try to find the slope by doing change in y over the change in x. So if I look at the change in y, this is increasing by 6. From -2 to 4 is 6. And the x's are increasing by 2. So that's a change of 6 compared to 2, which gives me a slope of 3. So I know right now the equation is y equals mx plus b. Problem is I don't really know what my b is. I don't know what my y-intercept is. So I'd really like to find this back number to help me with the equation. So I'm going to work back. Well, actually, I do have it. If I look at the table right here, the y-intercept occurs when x is 0. So I know this back number needs to be a -2. So now it's going to be pretty easy. To find f of 3, you basically just plug 3 in for this x right here and solve the equation. So you get 9 plus a -2, which comes out to be 7. So that's one way to do it. Another way that I've seen kids do it, and sometimes they think this is a little bit easier for them. I don't know. You got to kind of figure out what works for you. But some people like to kind of take this chart and expand it. So if I have 0, 2, 6, -2, 4, 16. If you can find a pattern in there, so for instance, the pattern here, it went up 6 when this one went up 2, so you could kind of find the middle amount. You could say, well, when this goes up by 1, over here is going to go up by 3, and then you could kind of extend that pattern, go up by 1, go up by another 3, and you could find out what f of 3 equals 7 there too. So however you want to do it. All right, number 12, we have another function. Pretty much just plug and chug on this one. We need to input 1 and just evaluate it, see what we get. So to figure out what f of -1 is, we're going to make sure, here's the biggest part, make sure you put parentheses in here. -1 squared, take away 6 times -1, added to 3, all divided by a negative 1, take away 1. Now I got to clean all this up and actually do the math. So negative 1 times itself is positive 1. A negative 6 times a negative 1, positive 6, positive 3. On the bottom, a negative 1, take away 1. We really don't take away, you add the opposite. So I get negative 2 down there. So that shakes out to be 10 divided by negative 2, which comes out to just be negative 5. So the correct answer there is A. Number 13, I have two functions, a g function and h function. Notice that the g function is kind of written into the h function. It says, what is the value of h of 0? So they want me to put 0 in for h. So basically, h of 0 is 1 minus g of x, but I don't know what g of x is. So I need to kind of put g of x right in here. So let's do a little bit of work over here to the side. So to find g of x, they tell me that that's 2x minus 1. So up here, I'm just going to substitute that in. H of 0 equals 1 minus, and instead of g of x, I'm just going to write in 2x minus 1. Now I got to be really careful here. I think like the whole key to this problem is handling this little portion right here. Whenever you see a negative in front of a parentheses, you want to distribute. So that's negative 2x plus 1. So now I can put the 0 in. H of 0 is 1 minus 2 times 0 plus 1, which is 1 plus 1 shakes out to be 2. So the correct answer there is D. Number 14, if f of x equals 5x squared minus 3 and f of x plus a equals 5x squared plus 30x plus 42, what is the value of a? All right, so big thing I have to realize here is that if f of x equals 5x squared minus 3, so notice that this x goes right in here. So if I want to find f of x plus a, if I want to find this part, what I'm going to do, f of x plus a should be, everywhere where I see an x, I'm just going to stick an x plus a in there. So instead of 5x squared, I'm going to replace that with x plus a squared, and then leave this part the same. So the only thing I did was I kind of took out this x, and I replaced it with the x plus a. I guess I could make that little 2 the same. So that's all I really traded out. Just kind of traded out these two pieces. Well, now I got to kind of work that out. I need to figure out what is x plus a squared. So let's do a little scratch work over here to the side. X plus a times itself, when I square it, it's just times itself. And you could use FOIL or expansion or whatever you call it. Some people use boxes. But first times first is x squared. Outsides, some people call this double distribution. Insides, and then the end. And cleaning that up, you get x squared plus 2ax's, because I can combine those like terms, plus a squared. So I'm going to take all of that and I'm going to replace it over here. So I'm going to get 5, and in parentheses, instead of x plus a squared, I'm going to go x squared plus 2ax plus a squared. And then don't forget about the minus 3 at the end. All right. And when I keep going with that, and I kind of clean that up even more, and I distribute this 5 all the way through to clear out parentheses, I get 5x squared plus 10 ax's plus 5 a squareds, take away 3. And now I need to figure out, that needs to come out to equal this, because they kind of told me what this equaled. So I'm going to put that over here, and I have 5x squared plus 30x plus 42. So this is kind of what you call matching coefficients. So I need to get my coefficients, everything to match. So 5x squared matches. So that one I don't have to worry about. The 30x and the 10ax. So somehow I need to get that 30 to come out with 10a. And the only a that's going to do that, I believe, is 3. So the correct answer here is C. If I were to keep going on this one and I were to kind of go through and finish the rest of this out and put the 3 in for A, over here on this side, I would get the 30x plus, and then if I do 3 squared, that's 9, and 9 times 5 would be 45. Take away 3, and that's going to give me the 42 is going to match as well. So all my pieces are going to end up matching all the way through. So that's a little bit different problem than what we've seen before. Number 15. H of x equals 1 over x minus 5 squared plus 4 times x minus 5 plus 4. For what value is the function undefined? So the big thing you need to know here is that a function is undefined when this bottom equals 0. Because you're not allowed to divide by 0, you get an error. So we need to figure out when is that denominator equal to 0. So let's kind of write this out up here. X minus 5 squared plus 4 times x minus 5 added to 4. When does that come out to be 0? Well, this is a quadratic. So let me first, I'm going to kind of expand this out. So let me just write that over here. X minus 5 times itself. Using FOIL, I get x squared minus 5x, another minus 5x, just doubles, plus 25. So I get x squared minus 10x plus 25. So I'm going to replace that up here. X squared minus 10x plus 25. Then I'm going to clean these parentheses up by distributing. So that's 4x minus 20 added to 4 equals 0. Now I got a lot of work to do with combining like terms. So I have x squared. So you're gone. Looks like my x's, I have a negative 10x and a positive 4x, which is negative 6x. And then my constants, I have 25, 29, take away 20, which comes out to be positive 9. So when does that equal 0? Well, most time when you solve a quadratic, if possible, you always want to try to factor it. So factoring, I'm trying to figure out two numbers that can multiply to make him and can add to make negative 6. So two numbers that multiply to make positive 9 would be 3 and 3, but they got to add up to be negative 6. So it looks like they both have to be negative. So now I have something times something equals 0. I can use what's called the zero product property. Sometimes I call it ZPP. But if something times something equals 0, one of you guys equals 0. And in both situations, regardless of which one, it looks like x equals 3 would make either of those 0. So the correct answer here to this problem is 3. Now, if you wanted to get a little bit of a kind of an expert tip on this one that would speed things up, I'm going to show you another way. So let's kind of stick around and I'll show you a faster way. If you notice right in this very first problem, you had x minus 5 squared, and then you saw a repeat of that x minus 5. All right. So if you want to solve this a little bit faster, instead of using the x minus 5, let's just call that x. We can go back and fix it later, but we'll call it x for right now. So I have x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 0. And this comes out to be x plus 2 when you factor it. All right. Well, now, instead of using x plus 2, I'm going to go back, or instead of using x, I should say, I'm going to go back and stick the x minus 5 in. Whoa, where'd you go? Shrinking down a little bit. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to put that x minus 5 in there. And kind of get rid of that wild mark. So I'm going to have x minus 5 plus 2. And then x minus 5 plus 2 equals 0. And now it comes out to be x minus 3 and x minus 3. And now I'm going to get the same answer as I did before. I'm going to just get x equals positive 3. Just a little bit quicker.